All right, here we go. We're going to learn the Vav Amud Beis today. We're starting on the bottom of the Vav Amud Aleph. So yesterday we learned that Rav told us, that someone who goes out to overseas, if it's more than 30 days before, doesn't need to check for his chametz. And Rava explained that specifically if he's not coming back. But if he is coming back, then it doesn't matter when he leaves. He needs to check for chametz. So the Gemara now asks, 3 lines from the bottom, Hani shleishim yemai b'detayu. This 30 days, where does it come from? Where's this whole 30-day thing from? So the Gemara says, "Kedetani within the brayso. Shaylim v'darshim b'ilchas Pesach, koydem haPesach shleishim yem." We start talking about and learning about the halachos of Pesach before Pesach begins, 30 days. So Purim is when we start. Shimon Gamliel Emer, where Shimon Gamliel says no. Shtei Shabbos, it's only 2 weeks before, meaning Rosh Chodesh Nisan. In my time, the Tanna Kama, what's the reasoning of Tanna Kama who says we should start 30 days before? Shaharei Moshe Amiv Pesach Rishon, Umazriel Pesach Sheni, because Moshe on the first Pesach taught about Pesach Sheni, which is a month later. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, "V'yasu b'nei Yisrael esa Pesach b'mayadai." Klal Yisrael made the Korban Pesach in its proper time. Uksiv, and it says, there were people who were tamei by contact with the corpse, and therefore were unable to bring the Pesach. So Moshe told them about Pesach Sheni. So we see that 30 days before Pesach Sheni, they learned about Pesach. So too, 30 days before Pesach, we're going to learn about Pesach. Rav Shimon Gamliel will respond to you and say, I need the ayir b'mila de Pesach. Once we started talking about Pesach, so the Torah just continued to talk about all the halachos of Pesach, which included Pesach Sheni, and not because we typically need to start a full month before the Yom. Now, my time is showing Gamliel. Now, what's the reason of Rav Shimon Gamliel? I understand why he doesn't agree with Tanna Kama, but what is the source for what he says? The Gemara says, because we find that Moshe on Rosh Chodesh Nisan told Klal Yisrael about Pesach. So from there we see that 2 weeks before is when you start talking about the Yantiv. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, this month should be for you as the first of the months, which is referring to Nisan. Uksiv, and it says, Dabra el Kol Das Yisrael, Lemar, speak to all Klal Yisrael, saying, that on the 10th of the month, everybody should take a lamb, and you're going to use it for the Korban Pesach on the 14th. So here we see that it was Rosh Chodesh, which is 2 weeks before Pesach, when they were supposed to start discussing the Yantif of Pesach. So the Gemara asks, how do you know that this was at the beginning of the month? Maybe it was on the 4th or the 5th of the month. So even though the pasuk does talk about Rosh Chodesh, and another pasuk talks about teaching Klal Yisrael about Pesach, but who said they were at the same time? Now, that's how Rashi understands it. Taisus has a problem with this because of a Gemara in Menachos, which Rashi quotes in Chumash, which says that when Hashem told Moshe, this month should be for you, the first of the months, Hashem actually showed him the new moon, because Moshe didn't really understand what's the new moon mean exactly, so Hashem actually showed it to him. So which means it was actually happening on Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is when the new moon occurs, and Hashem showed it to him. So how could you say that maybe it was on the 4th or the 5th of the month? It was clearly on the 1st of the month as the month began. So Taisus says what the Gemara means to ask over here is not that pasuk didn't take place on Rosh Chodesh, but that even though that pasuk took place on Rosh Chodesh, that doesn't mean Moshe told it to Klal Yisrael that day. So even though Hashem had this conversation with him on Rosh Chodesh, that doesn't mean Moshe then went and had the conversation about Pesach on that same day, on that same time. Maybe he had that conversation later. There's no proof from the pasuk. Okay, the Gemara continues. Ella Amar Rabba Bar Simi. So rather, Rabba Bar Simi gives us a different answer. And he says as follows. Mishmei Ravina, in the name of Ravina, from here. The pasuk says that Hashem spoke to Moshe in the Sinai desert in the 2nd year and the 1st month. It says that Klal Yisrael made the Pesach in its proper time. So that first pasuk is talking about the 1st of the month, and right after, in a different pasuk, it says, which is right before that, it says that Klal Yisrael made the Korban Pesach. So here we see that the conversation went from Rosh Chodesh talking about Pesach, which was 2 weeks later. To which the Gemara asks, what do you mean? Hachanami, here too, who says that this actually happened on the first of the month? Maybe it was on the fourth or the fifth of the month, and maybe this conversation didn't actually happen on Rosh Chodesh. The pasuk doesn't say it was Rosh Chodesh, so why is this any better proof than the first one? We could ask the same question. Rav Yitzchak says, no, here is different. Why? Because Asya Midbar mi Midbar, because we're using the term Midbar, the desert, which was used in this pasuk, and we're comparing it to another place where it says that, which is Ksiv Hacha b'Midbar Sinai. Over here it says that this happened in the Sinai desert. Ksiv Hasam, and it says Elsar Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe b'Midbar Sinai, also mentioning the Sinai desert, b'Ayil Mayid b'Echad l'Chodesh Hasheni, in the first of the second month. So here we see that when it talks about Bamidbar, it's in the desert, and in one place we see clearly that it's talking about on the first of the month, Rosh Chodesh. So too, he can prove that this other pasuk where it says Bamidbar Sinai is also referring to the first month. Rosh Chodesh, Avkam Rosh Chodesh. Just like over there, it's talking about Rosh Chodesh. So too over here, it's talking about Rosh Chodesh.
I understand that there's the Hekesh.
Yeah,
but I mean, like the word Bamidbar is probably in 1,000 places in Torah.
Yes, it's a very good question. So either we're talking about an actual Gzera Shava, and if it's an actual Gzera Shava, that means that we're specifically connecting these two words in these two places. Right. Or what it means is because it's talking about dates. So where it says the date, and it uses specifically the term Bamidbar Sinai, I don't know that we find that anywhere else, that we uses a date and talks about Bamidbar Sinai. Okay, so the Gemara continues and asks a question which really is not particularly related, but just a tangential question. The Gemara asks, "V'nechta b'reisha d'chodesh rishon, v'hada nechta d'chodesh sheni." Why doesn't the Torah list it in order? Meaning, these two psukim that we just mentioned. One, it says this is in the beginning of Bamidbar. So in pasuk Aleph, the very first pasuk in Bamidbar, that's where it says we're talking about the first of the second month, the first day of the second month. And then the other pasuk that we brought, which is not until chapter 9 in Bamidbar, that's where it says that you're talking about in the first month, the Chodesh Rishon. So the Torah seems to be out of order because the Torah first talks about what happened in the second month when they left Egypt, and then it talks about what happened in the first month after they left Egypt. So why is the Torah doing this out of order? So the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa, Mishmei Derav, Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa says in the name of Rav, Zayis and Maris, this shows us, Ein Muktam Memucha b'Torah. There is no before and after in the Torah, meaning the order is not necessarily in chronological order. Thank you. The order is written specifically for whatever reasons, but the actual chronology of it is not the reason why. So sometimes you'll find something which is written in one place, but it actually took place at a different time, and therefore there is no sequence regarding the time of when things took place in the Torah. Okay? So Amar Rav Papa says, he qualifies this, and he says, that's only true if you're talking about two different sections of the Torah. But if you're within one section of the Torah, then whatever comes first came first. Whatever comes second came second. Because if you don't say that, meaning, and you say that even within one sentence, one pasuk of the Torah, things could be really out of order from the way they really were, then klal uprat, we have a rule that one of the ways of making a drasha in the Torah is if you have a general rule followed by a specific. You have something that it talks about people, and then it talks about the Jewish people. So it's something that's general, and then it's specified afterwards. So that's a klal uprat. It starts with general and then gets specific. So the way we darshan that is ein bechlal elamasha b'prat. We only include in the general that which is specified. Meaning, when the Torah specified these specifics, it was because that's the only time it applies. Now, why did it say the general? Each time there will be another reason for that. But here, whenever we have this, it always goes by the specific. But how do you know? If you don't say that things are in order, then dilma prat uklalhu. Maybe it's actually out of order. Maybe the general comes after, because if you're saying things aren't in order necessarily, so then here where it's supposed to be the general followed by the specific, maybe that's not really what it is. Maybe it's out of order, and maybe it's the specific followed by the general, and we've just ruined the whole drasha. So obviously that can't work. So it must be that when you're within the same topic, within the same general vicinity within the Torah, then the order is very specific. It's just when you have one topic here and one topic over there, then maybe the second one came first in chronological order. Visu, and furthermore, we have another way of making a drasha, and that is pratu klal. It's the other way around. You have something specific followed by a generality. So then the halacha, the way we darshan that is nasa klal ma'aseh al prat. Then the general is adding to the specific which preceded it, meaning the specific thing said A, and now the klal saying not only A but everything similar to A. So we're generalizing the specific thing. And again, how can we make that drasha if you tell me things are out of order? Dilma klal upratu. Maybe it's really the other way around. Maybe it's a general that's followed by a specific, not specific followed by general. So therefore, it must be that when you're within the same topic, everything is exactly in order. Okay, so now the Gemara asks, if so, even if they are two different topics also, we should have the following question. According to the opinion that says that if you have a general followed by a specific, but they're far away from each other, they're not one right after the other, one's over here and one's way over there, then we don't connect them and we don't use the drasha of the general and specific. So then that shapir, that works. Everything makes sense because it's not in the same vicinity, so we're not going to connect them. But according to the opinion that says that even if you have a general and a specific in two completely different places, you can still make a drasha of the general and specific. But according to what we're saying, then why can you say that the things that are out of order are only within one place anywhere in the whole Torah? Because let's say you understand that the order is only specific within each parsha. Let's just take parsha for an example. So that means if something's in Parshas Bereshis and something else is in Parshas Nayach, so then you don't know which one came first. Maybe Nayach came first, maybe Bereshis came first. Fine. But now we're saying you can only do that when you're in different parshas. But if you're within Bereshis, then it has to be in order. Why? Because we have this klalu prat system that we have to be able to use. But what we're saying now is that the klalu prat system can apply even from Bereshis to Nayach. So that means even though they're nowhere near each other and they're in two different parshas, we can still use the klalu prat drasha. So if you're telling me things might be out of order by the time you get to Nayach from Bereshis, so then we've undermined the whole system again because maybe it's out of order. So how could you make the drasha?
Always in order unless there's a specific reason.
No.
Do we always say that? Don't we say that unless there's a specific reason for it to be out of order? It's always chronologically in order.
Well, the question is, can you prove anything from the order? That's the question. The answer is no. You can't prove anything from the order because the order is not chronological. But now we're asking on that, well, if that's only true within one parsha, for example, so then how could we make a klalu prat or prat to klal or any of these drashas even from one parsha to the next? Because maybe it's out of order. That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says, Michael Mayer, what are you going to say? So the Gemara says, Afilu lamanda amar danin, even according to the opinion that says that you can go from one parsha to the other, and you can still say a prat to klal or a klal prat, that's still only true when you're within the same general vicinity and the same topic. But even he agrees that when you're going to two completely different places, you cannot do a klal or a prat to klal. None of those things work. So meaning what we're saying at the end of the day is that when you go from one topic to another, everyone agrees that things are not necessarily in order, and therefore you cannot make a klal and a prat or a prat and a klal or anything like that when you're going from one topic to another. Only within the same topic, then you can, because then things are certainly in order. Okay, the Gemara continues on Rabbi Yehuda Rav. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rav. Habaydik tzarich sheyivatel. Someone who searches for chametz needs to also nullify it and say that I'm nullifying any chametz that I have. It's not mine. My timer. What's the reason for this? If you're going to tell me it's because of the crumbs, meaning, let's say you checked, but you missed a little bit. There's little some things here and there hidden in places. So maybe that's why you need to be mavatalit. So make sure that you don't have any chametz at all, even the crumbs that you couldn't find. The Gemara says, well, that's not necessary. Halai chashivi. Those have no value. Those are worthless, and you don't need to be worried about those at all. Why would you even be concerned about those on Pesach? Now, maybe you'll say, Kivin deminter lahu agav beisei chashivi, since you are protecting it, meaning it's within your house, and anything in your house is guarded. And the fact that you have it amongst all your other things means that there is some value to it because it's part of your guarded goods. It's part of your stuff that you're keeping together in your house. And therefore it has a certain level of value. But that, the Gemara says, is not true. Why? Because we learned in the Brisa, let's say there are the ends of figs, and these are parts that people typically don't eat. They're not properly ripened. They don't develop properly, and they're in his field. But he's not guarding his field because of those, because he doesn't really care about those. He cares about the grapes, right? So the question is, are those considered that they're still within his jurisdiction? Is he guarding them, or is he not? Or another case, so if another you have the bad grapes that again he probably doesn't care about, and he's guarding his field, but not because of the vines and the grapes, because the good ones he already took, but he's guarding them because of other vegetables that are there. So the question is, what's the status of those other things that are usually gotten rid of? So the Gemara says, the Brisa says, "Bizman shabal bayis makbid alein asur mishum gezel v'chayavim b'maiser." If the owner actually cares about them, then it is prohibited to touch them because of stealing. That would be theft, because the owner still cares. That means they are still his because they are within the confines of the field that he is guarding, even though he's guarding it for another reason. And they are required to be tithed. In other words, whenever you take produce in, you've got to tithe it. And if he still cares about it, he's going to have to tithe it. However, if the owner doesn't care about them and he really only cares about the valuable stuff, then mutar mishum gezel, people are allowed to take it. There's no prohibition of theft. Upitur mishum meiser, and there's no issue of taking meiser, of tithing them, because you only have to tithe foods that are brought into the house, meaning things that you're processing normally. But if you're just grabbing an apple off a tree or something, you don't need to tithe that. So these would fall into that category. So what do we see from here? What we see from here is that if the person doesn't care about them, even though they're in his jurisdiction, they're in his property, and they're in the field that he's guarding, since he doesn't care about that specific thing, it doesn't count. It's worthless. Someone can even go and take it. It's not even considered his anymore. There's no theft. Someone else can walk over and eat it. So why wouldn't the same apply to the crumbs on Pesach? So Amarava Rava says you're right, a whole different thing. The concern is Gezerah Shema Yimtza Gluska Yafa. The concern is you might find something that actually does look good. It might not be about the crumbs. It might be about something that you missed that actually looks edible. And you're thinking, your thoughts are on it, which Rashi and Taisus have different ways of understanding it. The idea is that it's something that you're not going to just immediately think, oh, I don't want that. You might have a fraction of a second of thought, oh, hey, where'd that come from, right? And for that fraction of a second, I'm sorry. So for that fraction of a second, you're not automatically thinking, it's not mine. I don't want it. I was already mavatl and everything. So therefore, we want to make sure that everything is batal from beforehand. So this way, once Pesach comes around, none of it's yours. And even if you were to find it, you're already mavatl. It's already not yours. You've already given up on it. And therefore, you don't have to have any concern that something might be found that he might have a second thought of, oh, hey, maybe I want that. Obviously not thinking that it's Pesach, and then remembering a second later, oh, it's Pesach, I can't have that. So to avoid that moment of potentially violating the prohibition of having chametz, we want to make sure that you're mevatel it all from before Pesach. So now the Gemara asks, why don't you just be mevatel it immediately? As soon as you find it, just get rid of it. Just say, oh, I don't want it. No, it's not mine. It's batel. It's gone. Why do you have to do that from before Pesach? Why can you do that when you find it? The Gemara says, because Dilma Meshkacha said the Basar Isura. Perhaps you will find that after the time that the chametz is prohibited, meaning that chametz becomes prohibited from halfway through the day on Erev Pesach. Now, if you find it any time after that moment, we're going to have a problem. Why? The Gemara explains, it's not in your jurisdiction anymore at that point. And you cannot be mevatel. You can only be mevatel that which is in your possession. This is already considered taken out of your possession, and therefore you cannot be mevatel it. Why? Damar Belazar, as Belazar said, there are two things that are actually not in your possession, and nevertheless the Torah considers it as if it's in your possession, just to make you liable for it. So Elohen, and these are they. Bar b'shusarabim. If somebody makes some sort of stumbling block or a pit or something that people can hurt themselves on or damage themselves on in a public area, it's not yours because it's in a public zone, but you're still responsible for it. The Torah makes it as if it's yours, that you're responsible for any damages that it causes. And the chametz and chametz from halfway through the day in Erev Pesach. So what we see from here is that when it's already prohibited, it's no longer in your possession, and now you cannot be mevatel it. So we're concerned you might find it after that time, and it'll be too late to be mevatel it. So therefore, you want to make sure that you're mevatel it already from the night before when you do your bedikas chametz. All right, we'll stop here.
Say that again, please.
Sure. What I said was,
Say,
what I said was that we are concerned, let me just end the recording. If I can figure out how,
They're on the floor. Stop.
record, stop.